EDU Endpoint office hours. Today is April 9th, 2024, the day after the solar eclipse. So I hope you got to enjoy that. And we will kick off our session here. Specifically, got a lot of updates to talk about. So Scott and I are going to kind of go back and forth through this. I'm sure you'll hear some commentary through the other team members. Be sure if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat and we'll get them answered for you. So, Scott, did you want to kick us off with the 2403 service release?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and I'll share out my desktop. Let me get set up here so I can walk everybody through the demo and get that going here. So last month, right, we had our last meeting, and then the day after that, 2403 drops. So lots of good stuff that was in this month's service release. So we're going to take you through some of the pieces of it. And I just want to make sure I got to get all my monitors set up here. And we'll kind of go in detail of what is there. So let me look at this and go from there. All right, so this was actually a pretty decent service release. I think there's a lot of good new features that you need to be aware of. And so actually this week, Copilot and Intune dropped, meaning that is now general availability. So Copilot and Intune is actually part of Copilot in security. So it actually adds there are some Intune capabilities in Copilot Security and Intune. And I believe on the April 18th of the Microsoft office hours, Rod Trent, some of you may have heard that name before. He's currently a person that does a lot of our security blogging, one of our security evangelists. But he also used to do have an old website around endpoint management called My IT Forum. So did a lot of that a long time ago. So anyway, he's going to be presenting on security, Copilot and security. So that would be a really good episode for you guys to watch. But there is some Intune specific stuff that is in that release. So just go take a look at that. And if you want us to do a demo on that or bring in some folks with that, we can definitely bring that out. All right.
Scott, one quick thing to talk about here. So we brought this up last week, but just know that for Copilot and Intune, you do need to be using Security Copilot.
Yeah.
You might see it in your console if you go under tenant administration. There's now a node in there that says Copilot for Intune. You won't be able to turn that on until you subscribe to Security Copilot. And Security Copilot, it's charged at $4 per user per scale unit effectively, but we won't get into the weeds of all of that here right now today. But just know that if you see this, it's something it's not a part of the Intune suite. It's not a part of your A5 licensing, A3 licensing. It's a completely separate thing that has to be purchased. So just be aware of that.
Yep. All right, so let's go through and show you what's new in case you haven't gotten up to date. So the first thing that I wanted to make you aware of is the Security Copilot. If you're using a GCC tenant, we now have remote help available for Windows and Android devices in there. So that's also important. So first one new thing is this was called OEM config. So we actually have the ability now to deploy a BIOS configuration through Intune to Dell devices. Now, where you're going to do that is you're going to come over here to your configuration profiles. You're going to create a new policy and then pick Windows 10. You're going to come over here and pick templates. And this is right here where you're going to see it. It says BIOS configurations and other settings. So I know there's a lot of you on here that use Dell devices in here. So we'll call this just Dell BIOS config. And again, I do not have a Dell device in my device inventory, so I have not tested this. It'd be great if anybody would love to test it. I'd love to hear your feedback on this. But if you'll notice here that there is a drop down for Dell, and then you can go, if you look at the documentation here, it says specifically you can use the Dell command tool, opens Dell's website to create a BIOS configuration file, and then you can upload that file into Intune as well. So that has been again, that just kind of goes to the story where our whole chip to cloud story. So we've had DFCI and Intune for a number of years now that you can manage Surface devices. I believe there's some other OEMs that have also embraced DFCI, but now you can use Intune to manage the BIOS settings as part of that. So I would be, looks like there's a few of you probably will use Dell devices. Again, I'd love to hear your feedback on this and see what your experience is like.
Hey, Scott, one thing to add to that, you actually also need to deploy the Dell command tool. It's not just the configuration file goes down to the device and then Intune does something to it. You actually do need to create a Win32 app to also deploy in order for it to consume that config file.
Yep.
So it's a two-step process to it.
Yeah, so it actually says that right here. You add the config file, deploy Win32 app, and then assign the policy to your users.
Yeah, so it's kind of confusing the first time you look at it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So just be aware of that. We also finally made an update to endpoint privilege management. Garrett's actually we're going to actually talk about that a little bit later in our session today. One of the things we wanted to talk about today was how you can do your own endpoint privilege management testing. You know, how can you set up your own proof of concept? We're not actually going to have you do it, but what are some apps that you can use and some tests that you can run in your own environment if you want to test out this capability. So one of the things that we've added in this is the support approved elevation type. So what we'll do, and we'll show this a little more in the demo later. But I'm going to just open up an existing rule here for just a moment that I have. And if you were to look at the rules here, it's under elevation type. You'll see that there's a support approved elevation type here. And this basically what this elevation type does is it sends a rule or a notification to an admin to the Intune console, which allows you to approve or deny that elevation request. You also have that support approved elevation in your client settings policy as well. So for example, if you want to apply different EPM policies here, you can set a default elevation response to require support approval as well. So again, we'll get into some of the more of the nitty gritty here in a few minutes, but that's one of the newer features there as well. So as we go down here, there's some extended capabilities for managed Google Play apps on personally owned Android devices. So we've added some features there. You'll also see some new settings available in the Apple settings catalog for iOS and iPadOS around declarative device management, as well as macOS. And then we've also added some new settings in the Windows settings catalog for delivery optimization. So again, just to bring some parity between what you see in templates and also in the settings catalog. New archive scanning files for the antivirus policy for Windows. There's also some updates to the assignment filters. So again, you can use managed app assignment filters for Windows BAM app protection policies now. And then some, some new compliance settings that let you to verify device integrity using hardware-backed security features. Compliance settings for Android. We also now have Windows quality updates for expediting non-security updates. So if you're familiar with this policy down here, it's the one that's under your Windows 10 updates. It's this quality update policy here. So what this is going to allow you to do is to, at the end of each month, we have what we call the D week update. It is a non-security related update. It has all the non-security related fixes. This is a perfect update for you to test in your environment. For example, if you want to either thank you for muting that. So this is going to allow you to expedite those updates out to users. So again, just if this is useful in settings, for example, let's say you have a non-security related issue that is fixed in this update and it's causing a lot of angst in your organization, you can speed up the deployment of that update. So that's another one. There's also a remote action to pause the config refresh enforcement interval. So some new stuff there as well. So new updated on the security baselines, and then just also some improvements for Defender for Endpoint as well. So we've also added a few additional apps for that have the Intune app protection policies there as well. So just a lot of cool. I think it was a good month. A lot of cool features. So definitely take a look at this. I think from a Windows device standpoint, I think a lot of you will benefit. A lot of you that use Dell devices will benefit from this OEM config policy. And again, I would love to see how this works out for you. Just make sure that, again, as Richard said, you deploy Win32 app as well. The necessary Dell software, set that up, but that should make giving you the whole, being able to configure that whole device from the firmware on the device all the way through Windows should make that story a lot easier now. So with that, Garrett, I'll go ahead and do my Windows 10 ESU update as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So another announcement that came out this week, and I'm going to go ahead and link to this, and this is an important one for all of you that are involved in endpoint management. And this is, I'm just putting this in the chat here. This talks about Windows 10 end support. So it's not too early to start thinking about it. And so what is our story going to be for Windows 10 end of support for education? So first thing right now to know is Windows is the date for Windows 10 end of support. That's going to be October 14th. So we're a little less than 2 years away from that now. Less than 2 years. So the time is going to be starting to think, well, what are those devices that are capable of being updated to Windows 11 that I'm currently running Windows 10 on? And then you're probably going to have a large set of devices that are not going to be able to run Windows 11 because, again, we rebase the hardware requirements. Typically, anything that you purchase that's an 8th gen Intel processor and has a TPM 2.0 chip is going to be able to run Windows 11. But we know, in fact, that right now budgets are tight, especially in K-12, because a lot of the federal COVID money is going away. So we're looking about how do we fund devices. So obviously that is, it's a lot of topic of conversation in our K-12. And then, so again, that's going to vary by customer. And then obviously you may have some specialty devices in your, more so in higher education, that are running Windows 10 and you necessarily can't upgrade those to 11 because maybe they have some software. So there are going to be several ways that you can get extended security updates for your Windows 10 devices. One of those is that you can, obviously, to go to Windows 11 is upgrade a new PC. You can also move to cloud PC, a Windows PC to Windows 365. So if you have a Windows 10 device that can't be upgraded to 11 and it goes to Windows and you have a license for Windows 365, you can get extended security updates for 3 years, no additional cost. Now, let's get to the big thing here. If you have devices, if you're not going to buy Windows 365, and you need to extend the life of your desktop, what does it cost to get the extended security update pricing for those devices? So we're going to, for education, we're going to offer extended security updates for 3 years. It's going to be on a scaled pricing program. So what this means is that the first year or the first month of the extended security update is going to be November 2025. You're not obligated to buy 3 years. And matter of fact, we're not even transactioning this yet. That's not going to start until October of this year. But what is the pricing going to be? $1 per device for the first year. So that's $1 for 12 months of updates. That is only security updates. That's not any type of non-security related fixes, no backporting of features. It is just going to be a security update. So for the first year, it will be a $1 per device. So if you have 8,000 devices that can't run Windows 11 and you need to update those devices, it'll be $8,000. So obviously that's a lot cheaper than going out and refreshing a whole bunch of devices. Year 2, it is going to be $2. So that'll be $2 per device. And again, if you're doing this over a phased approach, then and let's say you updated 4,000 devices from that 8,000, you only have to do 4,000 devices the next year. Then again, you just pay the 4,000 times 2, and then we'll cut that in half. Then let's just say maybe you finished off most of the devices and you only had like 100, then it would be $4 the third year. So again, it basically doubles in price every year. This is going to be extended to all education customers for all K-12 and higher education. So in the meantime, what you need to be planning on is for those devices that can handle Windows 11, go ahead and start your upgrade planning for that. And then for those devices that obviously cannot handle the Windows 11 upgrade, just know that you have a path. You have several options. One is the Extended Security Update Program for Windows 10 specifically for education. So we've significantly have discounted the ability for you to get extended security updates. Again, it's $1 the first year, $2 the following year, and $4 for the third year. So yeah. I know there's a few of you that have asked, for example, can they be deployed? A lot of the technical benefits of that. A lot of those technical details we're not ready to release yet. So like, can they be deployed via WSUS or config manager, things like that? We will have all of that information as we get closer to the actual time that these updates will be released. So we'll have more information to share at this time. But we wanted to go ahead, get the pricing information out here so you can start communicating this up to your leadership, and just know that, I think this is going to be important to plan. So as you are going through budget cycles and looking at what devices you want to replace, obviously you want to replace those that can't run Windows 11, that are only cannot be updated first. But if you do need to keep those around for additional reasons, as I described earlier, you now have a path forward to get an extra life out of those devices for at least 3 years beyond October 2025. So, Richard, Garrett, do y'all have any additional thoughts on that?
No, I'm speechless, Scott.
You are? That's good.
You just contact your sales rep in order to get this pricing?
Yes, and they'll be able to start transaction on that later this year. So don't call them tomorrow. I wouldn't even call them for at least 6 months. So yeah, it's going to be a while before you can start transaction. We'll be able to buy those. But again, that's going to be, you got some time. So I know there's a couple questions in there. For example, like, can it be deployed through WSUS? That sort of thing. So we'll have all the technical details going forward, but I think this blog post is important. Share this with your leadership and then consider this. But definitely for those that can be upgraded to Windows 11, I would go ahead and start planning that upgrade path, or over the next couple of summers, and get those, because there are a lot of benefits to Windows 11, not only from a security standpoint, but just an easier management, that sort of thing. So, all right. So, Garrett, I think you had some stuff that you wanted to share about Entra ID. Give that back over to you.
Thanks. Yeah. Nothing that we haven't already talked about before. So I'm just going to reshare my screen. But I wanted to remind everyone, there's a blog here, and I'll throw it in the chat, specifically of what's new in Entra ID. But if you read this blog, it's got a lot of good information, specifically around Azure AD and the deprecation of the Azure AD PowerShell and MS Online PowerShell modules. So I know that doesn't always fall under, the end user compute folks, but if you're like me, when I was a sysadmin, I wore a lot of hats, and I would use these PowerShell modules for other duties as assigned. So those are being deprecated. So be sure to read those blogs there and make sure that you're informed of those dates and any changes in your environment that you do need to make around that. Specifically, any scripts that you've created before, you'll need to regenerate those using the Graph API. But there's also a note in there specifically around dynamic groups. And the dynamic groups, there is a couple of different operators that they are going to start deprecating in, I think, July of 2024. So this year, this upcoming July, beginning of the school year for most of you, we are removing the match and the not match operators when creating those dynamic groups. So again, if you're creating groups inside of Intune, you're essentially creating those groups inside of Entra ID. And so those rules for the dynamic groups are changing. If you've used those before, many of you probably are, some of you may not be, but just be aware that those operators are being removed from the UI. They will still exist in the graph. So if you already have those built, or you have dynamic groups that are leveraging those operators, they will continue to work at least for a little bit of time longer. But we are removing those properties. So if you go into the UI and build a new group and you choose those two operators, they're no longer going to exist as options to select come July 2024. So just be aware of that. The reason we're doing this is because it's actually inefficient on our side. So in an effort to ensure stability of the service itself for everyone at scale, they found some inefficiencies of those operators, and we actually do have published documentation on other recommended approaches for building up those dynamic groups if you're leveraging that today. So just a call out there. And then we also have a few links here specifically for Windows 11, Windows known issues and product lifecycle. We've now actually exposed that through the Graph API. So yes, if you want to be a good M365 admin, you're going to have to learn Graph or use Copilot where necessary, but we have exposed that information now inside the Graph API, which could be really beneficial for Patch Tuesday scenarios. And then I wanted to call out specifically that on the ESU conversation, there is actually an AMA being hosted by the Windows team specifically around Win365 Windows Auto Patch, which I know is not available for education. We're still working on it. Don't ask me when it's coming because I don't know. And ESU specifically. So if you do have, and I'm really talking more to our commercial counterparts, academic medical centers, if you're kind of on that e-licensing or you have more of those commercial scenarios in your environment, those ESUs might look a little bit differently, right? So for the A SKUs, you get the EDU pricing, but for E SKUs, you don't. So make sure that you understand that, and that if there's any questions, that you can always go to that AMA and just kind of listen in too. And then also there's a little blog that was published about configuring the weather and more on the lock screen, which is always a fun part of our role as endpoint administrators. So just some highlights there. And then I think we just wanted to go directly into the EPM demo. but I will pause
All right.
because
Hang
I
on.
think there's a hand raised.
That's the hand up.
Yep. Is it Nerman?
Yes. Hi,
Go
Gary.
ahead. Hey.
Just a quick question. So,
Yeah.
This time around, we got started on upgrading Windows 10 to Windows 11, a lot sooner than we did going from 7 to 10. So we're almost done upgrading our endpoints that have compatible hardware. Our next step will be to kind of start looking at the devices that don't have a compatible CPU or TPM version. And I know there is a registry hack that you can, enter so that you could install Windows 11 on unsupported hardware, but you do get a warning message that Microsoft isn't really going to support this. So I'm curious how if we do that and let's say everything works fine with that endpoint, is Microsoft going to continue providing security updates, or is it really feature updates that are going to be limited in the future?
Yeah,
Well,
so
it's unsupported.
yeah,
Go ahead, Richard.
yeah, you definitely be in an unsupported scenario, right? So, would we limit security updates? That's hard to say. I can't comment one way or the other that we would or wouldn't do that. However, what I have seen, this is primarily in the press, but those that have been using that hack for the earlier releases of Windows 11, I want to say that I saw some folks say that stopped working in later releases. I don't know if that means 24H2 is going to block it or not, but I have seen some rumblings that folks that were using that reg hack in the past, it was no longer working for them. So given that, again, it's unsupported, we could potentially be taking this away like with 24H2. I wouldn't rely on this as something that is going to be good for you moving forward. I'll put it that way.
All right, sounds good. Thought
Yeah.
I'd ask the question. Thanks.
But you're also asking the Microsoft folks, so
Yeah.
we can only say what we can say. Awesome. Good question. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for just a second and switch over to my demo environment, and I'm going to walk you through the EPM demo for support approved. Awesome. All right, Scott, thumbs up. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so I'm sure most of you are familiar now with an endpoint security node. If you have EPM licensing, you can click on EPM here and then actually go in and create policies. If you don't have licensing today, this policy, create policy button will actually be grayed out. You can acquire trial licenses in your tenant specifically. So if you wanted to do that, you can actually come to tenant administration, and then if I can remember, into add-ons, you can come in here and see all of the available add-on capabilities. You can do the entire suite, or you can do these individual components. So if you just want to try EPM, I think you can get 250 licenses for 90 days. Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott.
No, you're right.
That you can go ahead and sign up for that. You can do it through the Intune console. You could do it through the M365 admin console, and light those capabilities up. Once you've got that, then you can actually come in here and actually create policies. And so you'll notice I've got a couple of different ones in here. Number one, I've got what we call an elevation settings policy, and then I've got a couple of elevation rule policies. So that elevation, or the elevation settings policy, is essentially going to light up the EPM capabilities within Windows when we deploy these policies out, right? So there is an EPM agent that is included when you assign these policies. Through the IME, we light that up. We'll enable the EPM agent there, and then we can start creating our rules policies. So you'll notice I've got two different ones here. I'm going to kind of expand this out because I've got one that is a user confirmed. This is the capability that has been out now for close to a year, and what we have now is the support approved method. So I've got two different apps. They're configured differently to kind of showcase the examples here. When you create a policy, I'll just walk through this really quick. We'll create that rules policy. You come in here and you name it, no different. Ignore the name right now. You'll notice that the elevation type specifically here, let me zoom in there for you, is user confirmed. If we click edit instance and we come down here to the elevation type, you'll notice that we now have that drop down available for support approved. So what you'll do is you'll click support approved, give it a rule name, require that rule to elevate. You can obviously choose to require all child processes to elevate if you want to create kind of a chain effect there. But if you just want all child processes to run as elevated to make it a simple process for your end users, we can select that. That's typically my recommendation to do it if you have applications that call those child processes. From here, we can go in and note the specific file name, signature source, like if we want to use a certificate file, or if we just want to use a file hash to upload to validate the application settings here to elevate this particular process. So really the key there is to show that support approved is there. If I come into my pre-existing rule that I've already defined, you'll notice that I've done this for VLC. So I will come down and edit this and show you what this looks like. Again, I've got support approved. All child processes are going to run elevated. I've noted the file name and the specific file hash. Once I've got that, I'm going to assign it to my group of devices that I would assign this as needed in traditional Intune fashion. So I've got my device specifically here, but what's cool about support approved is that it looks a little bit different than our user confirmed. So I'm going to show you user confirmed and I'm going to show you support approved so you can kind of see the differences here. So I showed you that I had created both of those types of rules in my environment. What I've got are these applications right here. If I right click on this Notepad++, I can run with elevated access. This is what the user confirmed experience looks like. So notice that I can come in and open this app as an administrator. But key here, let me get this, is open this app as an administrator, right? That user confirmed says, I want to essentially say that this rule in place allows a standard user to elevate this process right here in the user context, right? And we're going to elevate just the process. We're not going to grant the end user local admin rights to be able to run this process. So I'm going to open this app as an administrator. I do have to require business justification in order to run this. This is the power of EPM. This is why we're so excited. But notice the difference here, and I'm going to show you this because we can actually do this. If I run this one with elevated access under the support approved method, notice the key differences here, right? Let's see. It's a request to open this app as an administrator versus open this app as an administrator. I still have to require business justification, but you'll even notice here from an end user perspective, I actually have to go request to get access to elevate this specific process. So I need this for my job, and you'll notice that it's a send button. So I'm going to hit send, and this process is actually going to send back a request to the Intune admin inside the Intune console. So if I jump back into my demo portal, I'm just going to go back here to EPM. You'll notice that there's a tab up here for elevation requests. And look at that right there. There's now a request here for this particular application, who the user was, and what the status of that request is. I can click on this. And as an Intune admin now, I can go look up this specific information. I can see, okay, here's what the app is. Here's the device that we're requesting this process on. Is it Intune compliant or not? There's the business justification that I supplied as an end user to this request. And then I have the ability to approve or deny this request. Now, what's really important to understand is that in a support approved model, the request, once the request is sent, there's a 24-hour window where the user has to not only request that access, and the Intune admin has to approve it, but that the end user then has to execute the elevation of that. And so you have this 24-hour window, and that's not configurable right now. It's just how it is inside the tenant. that once you initiate that request as an end user, you have 24 hours. Hopefully the Intune admin does their job and approves that request and allows the end user to then go install that app. If either of those don't happen within the 24-hour period, let's say that the Intune admin doesn't see that request and doesn't approve it or doesn't deny it, then the end user will have to go resubmit that request. Let's say that the Intune admin doesn't see that request, let's say an hour later after the user submitted it. Then the end user will be notified in Windows, and hopefully I'll show you that in just a second, that if they don't take action and they don't go elevate those processes and get that application installed or ran or whatever they need to do for their job, then they're going to have to resubmit that request again, right? That expires as well. And so understand that there's the support approved method has a time bomb, essentially, that that request is only good for 24 hours. And so it's key to understand that for specific scenarios. I think everyone was really excited about support approved, but when you kind of think about it, this is really meant for those one-off applications, highly secure environments where we need, but if you have a portable app or a portable executable or something that you need to run, support approved probably not going to be the best method to leverage. You'll want to use just a user confirmed or I'm forgetting the automatic elevation request, right? Once you approve those rules in your environment. So to kind of understand the nuances there, and I'd be curious to get your all feedback on where this would make sense in your environments and the value add there, but understand that there's a 24-hour window. So I'm going to go ahead and approve this. You'll notice that the Intune admin provides a window or a reason for approving this application, and we're also calling out that app for 24 hours. They need this for their job, whatever that reason is. I'm going to say yes. You'll also notice that the status then will update to approved, expired, pending, right? I wanted to show you a few different examples in here. And then once it's approved, we should actually see a notification pop up through the Windows Notification Center. It's actually the Intune management extension that's going to do the notification. I was talking about this with Richard and Scott, that it's important to note because you want to make sure that your end users haven't disabled or hidden those notifications for the IME, because I'm not sure what the experience would be if they've suppressed those notifications and then they don't know that those apps have been approved or denied or whatever the case may be. There is actually a Windows bug right now as we were kind of deploying this out. I was hoping it was in the latest cumulative update, but it may not be there. That I had to go restart this machine and actually to get that notification to pop up. It shouldn't require a restart, but as this has been recently deployed, we were seeing that we had to go initiate a restart to actually have the notification pop up in here and inform the user that, hey, this application has been approved, and then they can go run that application. But note that the end user is notified through the standard Windows Notification Center through the IME process. I'll give it just another minute or so, and if not, I'll reboot and I'll show you that. But let's see. That's pretty much all there is to it. Richard or Scott, I don't know if you have anything you want to add specifically.
Got quite a few questions in the chat, so I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. There's
Okay.
one from Michael. Michael, do you want to ask her a question?
Yeah, really quick. Excuse my ignorance on this, but for these add-ons, we have a little over 10,000 A3 licenses. What is the actual, when you buy a license, what are you licensing? The user?
Yes, great question. So the way that the Intune Suite licensing works for education all up is that you can purchase the Intune Suite, which is comprehensive of endpoint privilege management, enterprise application management, cloud PKI, and a few other services. And those are licensed per user per month. So
now, what is a user in this situation? A student? If a student uses a managed device, do they need to be licensed?
Yes. And so we have faculty licenses and student licenses. And for education specifically, the Intune Suite licensing is $2 per user per month for faculty and staff, and $1.50 per user per month for students.
Okay, so there's no student use benefit for the add-ons.
There is no student use benefit for the add-ons.
So how do you
Now,
what's a
again,
way that
that's
you,
the entire suite. So you could also
Right.
purchase them a la carte. So if you're looking for just
Right.
EPM, you could purchase that a la carte.
so how do you figure out those numbers? You got to figure out the size of your student body versus plus the size of your faculty and staff, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation typically is to look at least at your faculty and staff licensing, and then typically you've got a decent understanding of your student count through your SIS or something like that. That you could get that pretty easily, but that's typically how I recommend to do it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep, great questions. Let's see, I need to scroll up through this chat. So Casey's question, so these EPMs are for when a user acquires the executable, not from the company portal. Yeah, exactly. So if you have a process, sometimes that is an application that's developed in-house. Sometimes it is an executable that they've downloaded. You just don't want to package up into the portal. I know that a lot of school software, like textbook software and things like that, typically you wouldn't necessarily have that in company portal, but you may. And so it's really designed for those applications that you're not pushing as a supported application for you all to manage.
Hey, actually, I want to add something here. So, Scott, you had a customer that bought EPM because they had a testing application that they deployed the testing app via Intune, but then to run it, they needed admin rights even after it was installed. Is that right?
Yeah, they did. Supposedly, that's what I understood. They bought it for. They bought this for their entire district. It was about 14,000 licenses, and again, it was just a one-off thing. But I've seen this used in the K-12 scenario, especially in scenarios where maybe the testing app does require some type of administrative privileges to run in those cases. So that's where they have purchased it. Good questions in the chat, especially about file hash. Do new rules have to be created? And Patty answered that. But yeah, if you have new software that if you have rules for specific software that needs to be installed, and file hash is the most secure. But then again, if there's any modification to that software, let's say you have a in-house line of business app and your developers create a newer version of that application, you will need to create a new rule because the file hash has changed. And if there's any modification in that file, especially the one that you already have let's say you have version 7.5 and you have a rule for it with a file hash, if an attacker were to try to modify the contents of that file hash will change. So file hash, anytime that you're working with EPM in scenarios, you want to just remember that file hash is the most secure. The second most secure method would be the certificate, the publisher certificate, which is generated by the publisher of the software, and that can be also set up as a reusable setting too. So if you get a new version of it and the certificate's the same, when you're setting up the rule in endpoint privilege management, you can reuse that certificate.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Laura just said that Certiport Compass testing requires admin rights to run the app, but Compass Cloud is coming soon, which does not. And then Joseph tried the EPM with Certiport Compass, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, really quick, so you can see on my screen here that after that reboot, that the notification came through. So endpoint privilege management request approved. If I click on that, it just disappears. But now I can go back to that application and, oops, done the wrong thing. Again, if I just run this with elevated access, remember it was a request to run, but because it's been approved now, it now opens or launches as open this app as an administrator. I don't have to provide business justification again. I can click continue and then,
Something went wrong.
oh, well, it's something went wrong. But you got to see the kind of the user experience there, and it should run. Oh, this one actually may be because I think I was testing your policies, Richard. I may need to unblock that one.
Yeah. Garrett, I got a few of the things that if others want to, you know, one of the things too is if you ever want to come up with a, I'm going to share out my desktop real quick if you don't mind, Garrett, and I'll show a few
Yeah,
things.
good. I was just gonna, it should
Yeah.
run here in a second. Yep, there it goes.
Okay.
It worked. I just had to unblock it.
A couple of things that, yeah, a couple of things that you can always do in your environment. If you're ever looking for software to that you want to test with specifically, one blog that I recommend or I've used a lot of is one of our peers, Nick Mosley, who is he's a cloud endpoint technical specialist in our manufacturing OU, has written a 6-part blog that I think is actually really good because it talks about a lot of it's actually what I use a lot of my demos on, and I thought it was very comprehensive, but he talks about the whole security, about where does EPM kind of fit in the whole journey of your zero trust, you know, where does you have your core posture, and then you have your laps, and then EPM, and then, you know, the WDAC policies, attack surface reduction, and then we get into some of the other EDR stuff. But what I do in my specific, anytime I'm doing demos for customers, but if I'm also doing proof of concepts, sysinternals, if you're not familiar with it, has some really good utilities for Windows in general, but they also are really good pieces of software to test with. So, like for example, to show auto elevate, I use ProcMod. If you're not familiar with Process Monitor, obviously that is going to allow, you know, like if I'm going to show the scenario of auto elevate, then I can just come over here on my client and just automatically click on it. You can see what an auto elevate is going to look like. So again, that's just going to start with collecting all the different reg keys and everything. For Notepad+, like for VM Map, I do both Windows authentication and business justification. And the way that you can test this, that it's working, is if you clicked on VM Map, notice here that when I launch this window, that it only has the processes for the logged on user who's Bruce Wayne. And if I were to click on show all processes, I'm going to get a user access control prompt. So what I can do here is then just come up to it and exit out of it, and then say I want to do run with elevated access here. And then once I do that, then I get the business justification. So I need that to install for troubleshooting. And then you can also get prompted for the Windows authentication as well. So again, that launches, and then if I sort, then I can see all the NT authority system. I can see those system level processes. And then we also have different, you know, for Notepad++, I use that's a good one to use, especially you can get the reusable certificate. You can export out that publisher certificate and then use that as a user confirmed, where they just have to put in a business justification. That's where I have that set up in the rule. A couple of other things when testing EPM, you can have different multiple client settings. So you may have one, and that's important, especially if you want to give one set of users the default elevation response of deny all requests, but then you may want to have one for IT that requires a user confirmation, and then requires some additional validation, whether it's a business justification or they have to put in Windows authentication to run that elevated action. One other thing to be aware of just in testing is that if you have the EPM rules themselves can be applied to both devices and users. So I have in my demo environment, I have I have all the devices targeted to all Windows devices, so they all are enrolled in EPM. But the rules themselves are targeted to users. So I just created an Azure AD group, assigned the EPM license to those users, and target it there. So if you get in a scenario where you have a rule that's targeted to the user that logs on that machine and is also targeted to a device, the device is always going to win out. So just another thing to keep in mind with this. A couple of other features that are on the roadmap. We can't discuss them right now, but I know some things that there are some features that many of you have asked about, but one that's going to be exciting is that if you are using Azure Virtual Desktop and you want to be able to use EPM with that, they are going to be making some compatibility for that, so you can use it on the single session. And then if you just want to get more into the technical details of EPM, like if you want to geek out on it, figure out where the client is, you can always go in here into the program files. You can see that's what we installed under ccolon program file EPM agent. And if you want to go and do further debugging, there's log files that you can open up with Notepad++ and read to your heart's content. It has all the policies in there as well. And then you can see all the different tools and the folder there. So again, that's where everything is installed. So once you know that you can see this folder in the client, you have a successful device enrollment. So, all right. All right, let's see. Anything else? No questions.
No, Scott, I think we're good.
Okay.
Great job, guys.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Any additional questions from the group? Yeah, check out the What's in Development page. We're going to actually have remote control for Mac OS, full control for Mac OS devices coming. They've actually published that. So that was pretty cool. So we'll have full remote control now for Windows, Android, and now Mac OS coming. So pretty excited about that.
I had a quick question about subscription activation, if you have a minute.
Sure.
So historically, we have purchased most of our hardware with the home product key because our KMS license is an upgrade license. So technically, we have to have Windows OS on the machine when we buy it. And so we do have the option to buy professional, but there's a little extra charge, not much, maybe $18, $14, $20, depending on the model that you're buying. So the subscription activation, when buying a professional embedded firmware key, works fine. It upgrades to enterprise and steps up, I should say. But in the situation where you have a core or a home product key embedded, is it the case that we have the education volume license ISO that we use to install Windows on what will be an Intune managed device? So that generic volume license key on the education volume license ISO on a machine that has the core firmware key, does that have to be activated with KMS, or because it has professional embedded, will that subscription activate?
Yeah, so the whole situation with home, it's an education only problem, because academic customers are the only ones that can purchase home legally and then have upgrade rights to enterprise or education.
Oh.
So it's a big problem, especially in higher ed, actually, surprisingly, because they're the ones actually take advantage of it more so than K-12. And I say that because in K-12 you have the option of purchasing what we call Shape the Future devices, which will actually ship with pro education. That's not to say that K-12 don't purchase home either. They also purchase home, but we see it a lot in higher ed. And so the way that we really have to handle this is a couple ways to do it. One, at Ubi, you could pass a product key to upgrade it to Pro, you can upgrade to Enterprise, you can upgrade to Education. You know, if you open up command prompt, run change pk.exe, you could then it'll give you a dialog box. You put in your product key, and then the device will upgrade. So that's one way to do it. The other option is you could just reimage the machine, and with Home, you won't be able to use subscription activation at all, because the way activation works is that if you were to install Pro with volume license media, which is what most people will tend to do, they'll go to VLSC, they'll download a Pro SKU, they'll download Enterprise Education, whichever, they'll download one of those, and the key in the firmware is not going to match the SKU that you're installing of Windows. And so when you do that, subscription activation doesn't actually activate anything. All it's doing is an uplift from Pro to Enterprise, or Pro Education to Education SKU. So because that's all it's doing, it never does the activation. What'll end up happening on the device is you will see it upgrade to the SKU that you're intending. So if you're putting Pro on the machine, it'll upgrade to Enterprise, but it'll show up as not activated. And so that's because the activation is trying to use the key in the firmware. It's not using your Windows subscription activation entitlement that you're targeting to the user. So the long and short of all this is that if you just want to put on Enterprise or Education on those devices, you will need to use either a Mac, which is what we would recommend. We don't necessarily recommend KMS, given all the mess that happened during COVID, when people were taking devices home and they were gone for 6 months. KMS activation stopped working because you couldn't hit the KMS server unless you were on VPN, and a lot of customers didn't have their users that were at home on VPN, so that would end up not working right. So that's the whole story.
But a professional key with your Enterprise volume license media, what happens in that situation? Did it go to Enterprise?
Yeah, it'll go to Enterprise, because the user is licensed because you're giving the user a subscription activation license for Enterprise. And so you're putting Pro on there, it would get Enterprise. But if I'm going to do that work, why would I put them on Pro? Why don't I just install Enterprise to begin with? Right?
Right.
It doesn't make sense to go through those hoops if I'm just going to be installing Windows anyhow.
Okay. So the only way to get to Education is to have Pro Education embedded in the firmware, the product key.
Right.
Okay.
But for higher ed,
Enterprise.
But for higher ed, are you higher ed or K-12?
Higher ed.
Yeah. So if you're in higher ed, you're most likely not purchasing Pro Education devices. That's primarily designed as a K-12 offering, and those devices have hardware restrictions that are probably going to be less. Those devices are probably not going to be as performant as what you would normally give to maybe your faculty and staff members, or maybe even your students within your higher ed institution.
That's interesting. So is it the case that if you have Education media and you install Education, but you have a professional firmware embedded key, that'll never actually run Education, or it'll never step up to Education?
Not
Enterprise.
Not if it's Pro. No, it'll go to Enterprise.
Not Pro. Okay.
Yeah.
So we should expect all of our professional firmware embedded product keys to run Enterprise regardless of whether or not it's professional or Education on the box.
Right. If you're buying a Windows Pro device today, so let's say you bought a bunch of Surface devices. Surface only ships Pro. You can get a device with Home, but you can't buy a Pro Education device from Surface. So if you're to buy a Pro device today, and then you Azure AD joined that device, and you targeted the user with a Windows 10/11 Enterprise license key, or a license, you don't give them a key, you just give them a license. When you do that, it moves them from Pro to Enterprise. It will not move them to Education.
Okay. Good to know. Cool.
You used to have a really good graphic. I'm trying to find it on the Learn site.
I put it
Did
in.
you just do it? Okay.
Yeah, I put in the link. There's a link to the documentation that talks about the different Windows upgrade paths. So depending on which SKU that you have, what is the client edition upgrade? Actually, it's this one. Second one I'm putting in now. That has the graphic that Garrett was talking about, like which SKU can upgrade to what. So for example, Like for example, you can take Windows 10 home
Mm-hmm.
and put if you have a a Mac key for Windows Education, you can take it from home to Education. But if you can't take a home SKU directly to Enterprise, you got to go from Home, Pro, then to Enterprise.
Okay.
So
Home
that
to
link that I posted
Education.
in there, and there's the graphic, that shows you how you can move between the various SKUs.
Okay.
But now keep in mind, this is upgrading from within the SKU itself. This is not
Right.
what I'm legally allowed to install. Legally, you can install Enterprise even if you were purchasing home. But the way that the upgrade process works from going from SKU to SKU,
Mm-hmm.
we're documenting here that you can't go home to Enterprise. We say you go to home to education. And in fact, education is actually a higher SKU. So when you look at that third on that page there that Scott linked to, if you go down to the table, there's a
Yes, I'm looking at
Windows,
it now.
there's a Windows Education line on the third line in there, and it has red X's across the board, except when you look at Enterprise. When you look at that blue down arrow, it's actually telling you it's an addition downgrade. So you're downgrading education by going to Enterprise. So when you look at the education SKU is actually a higher SKU than Enterprise. It's the highest of all of them. It's fully unlocked with everything. Whereas with going down to Enterprise, it's actually a downgrade.
So how does this table play into what SKU is installed on the box versus what's embedded in the firmware?
It doesn't. This is
Okay.
This is just basically telling you that if you just had a PC that you built, there's no firmware key, there's nothing in it at all, and you put and you purchased, you bought like Windows Home, and then you decide, okay, Home, I need more features, I need to get to Pro. Well, then this is basically just saying, okay, if I just pass a Pro product key, then I can go from Home to Pro, right? Or if I want to go Home to Pro Education, Home to Windows Education, all of those are green check marks. I can easily upgrade to those. It's totally irrelevant of what key is in the firmware, if there's a key in the firmware at all.
Okay.
Yeah, the whole key of the
I was about to. I think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say this whole key in the firmware thing and subscription activation. It's the most complicated thing in education because most of you guys are purchasing home or pro education. There's just a lot of home that's out there, and it's really confusing with subscription activation because in the name it says activation, but it doesn't activate anything at all. And so it gets really confusing when you actually assign a license to a user and they sign into a device and you're like, hey, the activation didn't work. Like I reimaged this thing to Pro, but it didn't. It went to Enterprise, but it says it's not activated at all. Like what is going on here? And I don't think we do a very good job of documenting the whole reason why this is the way it is. And if you look at the subscription activation docs, there's a lot of words, but it doesn't explain specifically how the activation actually functions and why you end up in these kinds of states.
Okay. So
And that's why I threw the article.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, really quick. So just so I'm clear, the expectation should be if we have a home embedded product key, then we're going to have to use KMS to activate. If we have a Pro embedded firmware key, regardless of which SKU is on the box, assuming that it's, well, Home I assume is not applicable, but Pro or higher, it'll go to Enterprise.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Just want to know what to tell my people to expect when. We've had discussions about this today because we're getting more people. We're not production yet on our Intune tenant, but we have more people testing, and that question came up today. So I wanted to make sure that I understood before I told them. So thank you.
Yeah,
I agree.
And thank you for those links.
Do a deep dive there.
Yeah. Don't ask me how I know all this. I
You
spent
got it.
way too much time on all this.
You got it. Like right now, I just have a PowerShell script that's assigned to devices that will do that WMI query to see what the OA3X original product key is. And if it's core, put the URL for the FQDN for the KMS host in the registry, which is usually just enough. When they connect to VPN, it'll activate. And if it's not core, then just rely on subscription activation to do it.
Yeah. Yep. That's also a viable way to do it as well.
Okay, cool.
All right, guys. I know we're way over now, so we'll I think call it here.
And adjourn. Thanks for joining, everyone. Hope you have a great week. We'll see
Yep.
you in a couple of weeks.
All right. Take care, guys.
See ya. Bye.